With her last $200 and an eviction notice, Aria Thompson is answering a job posting for a $150,000 per year childcare position, not knowing she's walking into the home of Seoul's most dangerous man. The salary seems impossible, the address leads to a fortress, and the man who opens the door radiates the kind of controlled danger that makes smart people run. But Aria can't run. Not anymore. At 24, Aria balanced 3 cleaning jobs with the weight of a destroyed career and mounting desperation. She had been a pediatric nurse once, licensed and proud, working the children's ward at Atlanta General until she'd witnessed a senior doctor falsifying medication records for kickbacks. Her whistleblowing had cost her everything. The medical board review dragged on for months, while hospital administration quietly destroyed her reputation. No hospital would hire her. No clinic would consider her application. 8 months later, her savings were gone, her apartment lease was ending, and she was scrubbing office floors at 3 a.m. just to buy groceries. Aria's natural hair was pulled back in a simple bun that emphasized her high cheekbones and tired brown eyes. She was tall, graceful even in exhaustion, with hands that still moved with the precise confidence of someone trained to save lives. She carried herself with dignity despite wearing the same interview dress she'd bought 2 years ago, despite the bus fare that had cost her lunch money, despite knowing this job posting was probably too good to be true. The address led to a gated estate in the hills outside Seoul, where she'd moved on a tourist visa that was rapidly expiring. The compound sprawled behind 15-foot walls topped with sophisticated security equipment. Camera systems tracked her approach. Guards in expensive suits spoke into earpieces as she announced herself at the main gate. This wasn't a family home. This was a fortress. The main house rose like a modern palace. All clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the morning sun. The interior was minimalist perfection, every surface gleaming, every piece of furniture clearly custom and costly. The Persian rugs under her second-hand shoes cost more than she'd made in the past year. The silence was absolute, broken only by the whisper of climate control and the distant hum of electronics. Choi Ji-han appeared in the main hallway like he owned not just the house, but the air around him. He was Korean, late 30s, with the kind of sharp, sculpted features that belonged in magazines. His dark hair was perfectly styled. His dark eyes missed nothing as they assessed her from head to toe. He wore a charcoal suit that fit like it had been tailored specifically for his frame, the fabric so fine it seemed to absorb light. Everything about him radiated control, wealth, and the sort of quiet danger that made experienced people step carefully. His presence filled the massive space. When he spoke, his English was perfect, accented but precise. "May I see your credentials?" he said, not please or thank you, just expectation of compliance. Aria handed over her folder, watching those dark eyes scan her nursing certification, her pediatric specialty training, her recommendation letters from before everything went wrong. "You're overqualified for childcare," he observed, still reading. Aria kept her voice steady. Sometimes life doesn't go according to plan. His gaze lifted to her face, studying her expression with uncomfortable intensity. "What happened to your medical career?" The question was direct, no softening, no diplomacy. Aria had practiced this answer, but under those penetrating eyes, the truth felt inevitable. "I reported a senior physician for falsifying patient records. The hospital chose to protect their reputation over patient safety. I was blacklisted from the profession." Choi Ji-han's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Approval, maybe. Recognition. He closed her file and gestured toward a sitting area that probably cost more than most people's cars. The furniture was leather and steel, modern but comfortable, positioned to face windows overlooking manicured gardens that stretched toward the tree line. "My daughter is 6 years old," he said without preamble. "Her name is Minji. 8 months ago, she witnessed something traumatic. Since then, she hasn't spoken. She doesn't eat regularly. She has night terrors that can last for hours. 17 nannies have tried to help her. All have failed." Aria felt something shift inside her chest, the old nursing instincts responding to a child in need. "What kind of trauma?" she asked quietly. Choi Ji-han's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Her mother was killed. Minji saw it happen." The words hung in the perfectly climate-controlled air. Arya's hands tightened in her lap as she processed not just the tragedy, but the implications. This man's wife had been murdered, and his daughter had witnessed it. The security, the fortress-like compound, the guards with earpieces suddenly made terrible sense. What does she respond to? Arya asked, her voice professional despite the personal horror of the situation. Nothing, he replied flatly. She tolerates the housekeeper because she's been here since birth. She accepts basic care from me because I'm her father. Everyone else, she either ignores completely or becomes violent toward. Arya studied his face, seeing past the controlled mask to something raw underneath. This wasn't just a wealthy man seeking convenient childcare. This was a father watching his daughter disappear into trauma, powerful enough to command almost anything except his child's healing. The position pays $150,000 annually, he continued, as if discussing the weather. You would live here, in the guest wing. Full medical benefits, including restoration of your nursing credentials should you choose to pursue them. In exchange, you provide round-the-clock care for Minji, assist with her emotional recovery, and maintain absolute discretion about this household and everyone in it. Arya's breath caught. The salary alone would change everything. The credential restoration would give her back her career, her future, her sense of purpose. But the discretion clause, the security, the way he said absolute with such finality, reminded her that Choi Jihan wasn't just wealthy. He was dangerous. What exactly would I need to keep confidential? She asked, knowing she was walking into territory that might be impossible to escape. Everything, he replied simply. My business, my associates, my family's routines, anything you see or hear in this house. The consequences for betraying that trust would be severe. The threat was delivered without heat, just cold certainty that made her believe he could follow through on whatever severe meant. Arya looked around the luxurious room, thinking about her empty bank account, her eviction notice, her expired visa status. She thought about a traumatized 6-year-old who needed help that 17 trained professionals hadn't been able to provide. Can I meet her? Arya asked. Choi Jihan's eyebrows rose slightly, as if the request surprised him. Most applicants wanted to discuss salary details or benefits. You understand she may become violent. She's bitten the last 3 nannies. One required stitches. Arya stood, smoothing her dress. If I'm going to help her, I need to see what we're working with. And if I can't help her, you need to know that before we waste each other's time. Something that might have been respect flickered across Choi Jihan's features. He stood as well, his movement fluid and controlled, and gestured toward a staircase that curved toward the 2nd floor. The guest wing is through here. Minji's room is at the end of the hall. They walked in silence through corridors lined with artwork that probably belonged in museums. The floors were heated marble, the walls painted in soft neutrals that managed to feel warm despite the overall grandeur. Everything was pristine, perfect, and utterly sterile. The children's wing was different. Softer colors, more comfortable furniture, toys and books carefully arranged but clearly unused. At the end of the hallway, Choi Jihan paused before a door painted soft lavender. She's probably awake, he said quietly. She sleeps very little during the day. He opened the door to reveal a room that should have been any little girl's dream. Pale purple walls, a canopy bed fit for a princess, shelves lined with toys and books, a reading nook by tall windows that looked out onto gardens. But the room felt empty, lifeless, like a stage set waiting for actors. In the center of the room, on a soft carpet, sat a small figure in a white dress that was clearly expensive but rumpled, as if she'd slept in it. Minji was tiny for 6, all dark hair and big eyes that seemed too old for her face. She was holding a stuffed rabbit, rocking slightly, staring at nothing. When the door opened, she looked up, and Arya saw the trauma immediately. The child's eyes were alert but flat, present but not engaged. She tracked her father's movement, but showed no excitement, no welcome, no recognition of emotional connection. When her gaze shifted to Arya, there was no curiosity, no interest, just wary assessment. Minji, Choi Jihan said softly, "This is Miss Thompson. She might be staying with us for a while." The little girl's expression didn't change. She clutched her rabbit tighter and returned her attention to the middle distance. Arya moved slowly, carefully, sinking down to sit on the carpet several feet away from Minji. She didn't speak, didn't try to engage, just sat quietly, and let the child get used to her presence. Behind her, she heard Choi Jihan shift slightly, probably in use to anyone approaching his daughter with such patience. After several minutes of silence, Minji's eyes flicked to Arya's face, then away, then back again. Arya remained still, breathing calmly, projecting the kind of peaceful presence she'd learned to cultivate in pediatric wards. Some children needed time, needed to feel safe before they could begin to trust. "That's a beautiful rabbit," Arya said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Minji's grip on the toy tightened, but she didn't pull away or show signs of distress. "What's his name?" Silence stretched for nearly a minute. Then, so quietly Arya almost missed it, Minji whispered, "Snowball." The first word she'd spoken in 8 months, according to her father. Arya felt her heart clench with professional satisfaction and personal heartbreak. "He's very soft," Arya replied, maintaining the same gentle tone. "I bet he's a good listener." Minji nodded slightly, the movement so small it was barely perceptible, but it was engagement. It was communication. It was hope. Behind her, Choi Jihan had gone very still. When Arya glanced back, his controlled expression had cracked slightly, showing something raw and vulnerable underneath. His daughter had just responded to a stranger, something she hadn't done in months of expensive therapy and specialist consultations. "I think you and Snowball and I might get along very well," Arya told Minji softly. "Would it be okay if I visited again tomorrow?" Another tiny nod, and Minji's eyes stayed on Arya's face for a full 3 seconds before drifting away. Arya rose slowly, moving with deliberate calm to avoid startling the child. In the hallway, Choi Jihan closed the door with careful quiet and turned to face her. His expression was unreadable again, but tension radiated from his controlled posture. "She spoke," he said, and it sounded like he was trying to convince himself it had actually happened. "She hasn't said a word to anyone except me in 8 months. Even then, only when absolutely necessary." Arya nodded, her mind already working through treatment approaches and trauma protocols. "She's not unresponsive. She's protecting herself." Someone that young who witnesses violence learns to be very careful about who they trust and when they're safe to show emotion. "You think you can help her?" he asked, and for the first time since she'd met him, Choi Jihan sounded uncertain, almost vulnerable. The powerful, dangerous man was just a father worried about his child. "I think she wants to be helped," Arya replied honestly. "That's the most important factor. The rest is patience, consistency, and proving she's safe. But it will take time, and there may be setbacks." "How much time?" "Months, at minimum. Maybe longer. Trauma recovery isn't linear, especially in children. She's built walls to protect herself. We have to help her feel safe enough to lower them." Choi Jihan studied her face with that unsettling intensity, as if he could read her thoughts and motivations. "When do you want to start?" he asked finally. Arya thought about her eviction notice, her dwindling bank account, her expiring visa. She thought about a traumatized little girl who had spoken her stuffed animal's name to a stranger. "Tomorrow," she said, "if you're willing to take a chance on me." Something that might have been relief flickered across his features. "We'll prepare a room for you in the guest wing. My assistant will handle the employment paperwork and your visa documentation." Just like that, her life changed. Arya Thompson, former pediatric nurse turned office cleaner, was about to become live-in caregiver to the traumatized daughter of one of Seoul's most dangerous men. As Choi Jihan walked her back through the luxurious halls toward the front entrance, she wondered if she'd just saved herself or walked into something far more complicated than a high-paying nanny position. The gates opened silently as his driver prepared to take her back to her shabby apartment to pack the few belongings she owned. Behind those gates waited a little girl who needed healing, a father who would pay anything to help her, and a world that demanded absolute discretion about things Arya didn't yet understand. She'd said yes to the job. Now she had to hope she was strong enough to handle whatever came with it. Arya returned the next morning with a single suitcase containing everything she owned worth keeping. The guards at the gate recognized her immediately, their earpieces crackling with confirmation as the massive doors swung open. This time, walking through the marble halls felt different. This wasn't a visit anymore. This was the beginning of something she didn't fully understand but couldn't afford to refuse. Choi Jihan waited in what appeared to be his private office, a space that managed to feel both luxurious and intimidating. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes in Korean, English, and Japanese. The massive desk was clear except for a single manila folder and an expensive fountain pen. Behind him, windows offered a view of the gardens where security personnel moved in careful patterns, always watching. The employment contract, he said without preamble, gesturing to the folder. Arya opened it to find pages of legal language that outlined her responsibilities in meticulous detail. Round-the-clock care for Minji Choi, assistance with emotional recovery and trauma therapy, educational support and social development, medical monitoring and crisis intervention. The salary was listed as $150,000 annually, paid monthly, with full benefits including health insurance, housing, meals, and legal support for credential restoration. The confidentiality clauses took up 2 full pages. She would not discuss Choi Jihan's business operations, his associates, his family's routines, or anything she witnessed in the compound with anyone outside the household staff. She would not maintain detailed records that could be subpoenaed. She would not communicate with media, law enforcement, or government agencies about her employment without explicit permission. The consequences for breach of contract were outlined with surgical precision. Immediate termination without severance. Legal action to recover all compensation paid. And a final clause that made her blood run cold. Any actions that endanger the safety or security of the Choi family will be met with appropriate measures to protect said family. This isn't just a nanny position, Arya said, looking up from the contract. Choi Jihan's expression remained neutral. No, it isn't. My daughter needs specialized care that most childcare providers cannot offer. My family requires discretion that most employees cannot maintain. The compensation reflects these unique requirements. Arya's mind raced through the implications. Taking this job meant accepting money from someone whose business clearly operated outside legal boundaries. It meant becoming complicit in activities she couldn't even identify. But it also meant helping a traumatized child who desperately needed care and saving herself from deportation and destitution. What exactly is your business, Mr. Choi? She asked quietly. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with those penetrating dark eyes. I manage various enterprises. Import and export. Real estate development. Security consulting. Some of my business partners are demanding individuals who require careful handling. The euphemisms were transparent enough. Choi Jihan ran criminal operations, probably involving international trade, territory control, and enforcement activities that demanded the kind of security she'd observed around the compound. Arya thought about her empty apartment, her expired visa, her destroyed nursing career. She thought about Minji clutching her stuffed rabbit, speaking for the first time in months. If I sign this, she said slowly, am I safe? Will working for you put me in danger? His expression hardened slightly. Anyone under my protection is absolutely safe. No one touches what belongs to me. Anyone who threatens my household faces immediate and permanent consequences. The possessive language should have been alarming, but something in his tone suggested complete sincerity. Choi Jihan protected his people with the same ruthless efficiency he probably used to eliminate threats. Arya picked up the fountain pen, her hand trembling slightly as she signed her name on each page. Welcome to the household, Arya, he said, and for the first time since she'd met him, Choi Jihan almost smiled. The housekeeper will show you to your room. Dinner is at 7. Minji usually eats separately, but perhaps you can encourage her to join us. Arya's room in the guest wing was larger than her entire previous apartment. A king-size bed with luxury linens, a sitting area with leather chairs and a coffee table, a desk with high-speed internet, and a computer for her use. The attached bathroom featured a marble shower and soaking tub that were clearly designed for relaxation rather than mere function. Fresh flowers on the nightstand filled the air with the scent of jasmine. She unpacked quickly, hanging her few clothes in a closet that could have held 10 times her current wardrobe. The contrast between her second-hand belongings and the opulent surroundings felt surreal, like she was playing dress-up in someone else's life. Minji's room was down the hall, and when Arya knocked softly, she heard the child's voice call, "Come in." Progress already. The little girl was sitting at a small table, carefully coloring in a book with crayons arranged in perfect rainbow order. She looked up when Arya entered, and this time, her eyes held recognition. "Hi, Minji," Arya said, settling into the child-sized chair across from her. What are you drawing? A house, Minji replied, her voice still barely above a whisper. With flowers in the garden. The drawing showed a basic structure with careful attention to details like windows and a door, but the flowers were wild splashes of color that suggested emotional expression rather than realistic representation. It's beautiful, Arya said genuinely. Would you like to show me more of your artwork? For the next hour, Minji shared her drawings, her voice growing slightly stronger as she explained each picture. The subjects were always safe things: houses, flowers, animals, rainbows. Nothing that might reflect the trauma she'd witnessed. As evening approached, Arya suggested they wash hands for dinner. Minji hesitated, then nodded, taking Arya's hand as they walked to the bathroom. The trust was fragile but real, and Arya felt the familiar satisfaction of making progress with a patient. The dining room was formal but warm, with a table large enough for 12 set with elegant china and crystal. Choi Jihan was already seated at the head, having changed from his business suit into dark slacks and a white shirt that somehow made him look more approachable without diminishing his inherent authority. Minji stopped in the doorway when she saw her father, her hand tightening on Arya's. He looked up, and his expression softened in a way that transformed his entire face. "Hello, Princess," he said gently. "Will you have dinner with us tonight?" Minji looked up at Arya uncertainly, seeking reassurance. "You're safe," Arya murmured. "Your daddy loves you very much." After a long moment, Minji nodded and allowed Arya to guide her to the chair beside her father's. The meal proceeded quietly, with Choi Jihan asking gentle questions about Minji's day and Arya encouraging the child to share small details about her coloring and games. It was the most normal family dinner the household had probably experienced in months, despite the underlying tension of trauma and grief. After dinner, Arya helped Minji with her bedtime routine. Bath time, pajamas, teeth brushing, and story time all proceeded smoothly. The child was clearly exhausted by the emotional effort of social interaction, but she seemed calmer than she had the day before. Arya was reading from a picture book about a brave little rabbit when Minji suddenly stiffened beside her. The book fell from Arya's hands as the child began to convulse, her small body rigid with seizure activity. Her eyes rolled back, and she made a choking sound that sent ice through Arya's veins. "Help!" Arya shouted, rolling Minji onto her side and checking her airway while timing the seizure duration. Within seconds, footsteps pounded in the hallway as security personnel and household staff responded. Choi Jihan appeared in the doorway, his face white with terror. Called Dr. Kim immediately, he ordered one of his men, but Arya was already moving with professional efficiency. She checked Minji's pulse and breathing, noted the seizure duration, and began the systematic assessment she'd performed hundreds of times in pediatric emergency situations. "Her airway's clear, but her pulse is rapid," Arya reported, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "This looks like a stress-induced seizure, probably related to the emotional exertion of today." "Has she had seizures before?" "Never," Choi Jihan said, moving to kneel beside his daughter's bed. His controlled facade had completely cracked, revealing the terrified father underneath. The seizure was lasting longer than normal, nearly 4 minutes, which put them in dangerous territory for potential brain damage. Dr. Kim arrived within 10 minutes, a distinguished older man with a medical bag who clearly served as the family's private physician. But when he began his examination, his hands were shaking slightly, and his assessment seemed routine rather than specialized. "We should transport her to Seoul National Hospital," Dr. Kim suggested. "This requires pediatric neurology consultation and immediate imaging studies." But Arya had already noticed what he'd missed. "Look at her fingernails," Arya said quietly, directing their attention to the child's hands. The nail beds were slightly blue, indicating oxygen saturation issues. And her breathing pattern is irregular. This isn't just a typical seizure. She's showing signs of respiratory distress. Moving quickly, Arya repositioned Minji to optimize her breathing, checked for any obstruction, and began the gentle stimulation techniques that sometimes helped seizure patients regain consciousness more smoothly. Dr. Kim watched with obvious surprise as she demonstrated expertise he clearly didn't possess. After another 2 minutes, Minji's convulsions stopped, and she began breathing more normally. Her eyes fluttered open, confused and frightened, but she was conscious and responsive. When she saw Arya's face above her, she reached out weakly. "It's okay, sweetheart," Arya murmured, taking the small hand in both of hers. "You're safe. You had a little seizure, but you're going to be fine." Minji's eyes found her father's face, and he moved closer, smoothing her hair with gentle fingers. "Daddy," Minji whispered, the word barely audible but clear. "I was scared." Choi Jihan's jaw worked as he struggled with emotion. "I know, princess, but Arya took care of you. She made sure you were safe." Dr. Kim completed his examination, but it was clear that Arya's quick thinking and specialized knowledge had managed the crisis more effectively than his general medical training allowed. Her assessment was accurate, he told Choi Jihan privately. Stress-induced seizure with secondary respiratory complications. She handled it perfectly. Over the next hour, as Minji drifted into exhausted sleep, Arya monitored her vital signs and neurological responses with the systematic precision of her nursing training. When she was satisfied the child was stable, she found Choi Jihan waiting in the hallway, his expensive shirt rumpled, his perfectly styled hair disheveled from running his hands through it. "She could have died," he said without preamble, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. "If you hadn't been here, if Dr. Kim had been handling this alone, my daughter could have died tonight." Arya nodded, understanding both the medical reality and the emotional weight of the statement. Pediatric seizures can be extremely dangerous if not managed properly. But Minji responded well to treatment, and I don't think there will be any lasting effects. Choi Jihan stepped closer, his dark eyes intense with something that went beyond gratitude. "You saved her life. You knew exactly what to do when trained medical professionals were failing." His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. "She stays with me. Anyone who can protect my daughter like that stays with me. No negotiation. No other options." The possessive declaration should have been alarming, but exhausted from the crisis and emotionally raw from seeing a child in danger, Arya found it oddly comforting. She was part of this household now, not just as an employee, but as someone essential to Minji's survival and recovery. "I'm not going anywhere," she said quietly, and meant it completely. Choi Jihan's expression showed relief, so profound it was almost painful to witness. For the first time since his wife's death, his daughter was in the hands of someone truly qualified to protect her. As Arya returned to her room near dawn, she realized her life had changed irrevocably. She wasn't just Minji's nanny anymore. She was family, whether she'd planned it or not. And in Choi Jihan's dangerous world, family was protected at all costs. 3 months later, the compound had transformed from a fortress into something resembling a home. Arya moved through the marble halls with confidence now, her second-hand clothes replaced by a wardrobe that Choi Jihan's personal shopper had assembled without being asked. The designer jeans and cashmere sweaters felt foreign against her skin, but they helped her blend into a world where everything was expensive and perfect. Minji's recovery had been gradual but steady. The seizures hadn't returned, thanks to carefully managed stress levels and a structured routine that gave the child security. Mornings began with breakfast together in the sun-filled kitchen, followed by educational activities that doubled as therapy. Arya had transformed one wing of the house into an informal classroom, with art supplies, educational games, and books carefully chosen to rebuild Minji's confidence without triggering memories. The little girl was speaking regularly now, full sentences that revealed a sharp intelligence and gentle personality underneath the trauma. She'd started laughing again, a sound that never failed to bring Choi Jihan to whatever room they occupied, as if he couldn't quite believe his daughter was healing. Today was different, though. Arya could sense it in the subtle changes around the compound. More security personnel than usual moved through the grounds. Choi Jihan's business meetings had been longer, his expressions more tense when he thought no one was watching. The household staff spoke in whispers and avoided eye contact. Something was building. Minji seemed oblivious to the adult tensions as she worked on a painting at her easel, carefully mixing watercolors to create the perfect shade of purple for the flowers in her garden scene. Her tongue poked out slightly in concentration, a habit that made her look exactly like her father when he was focused on paperwork. "Tell me about your family," Minji said suddenly, not looking up from her artwork. Before Daddy." The question caught Arya off guard, though she should have expected it. Children were naturally curious about the adults in their lives, and Minji was becoming comfortable enough to ask personal questions. I grew up in Atlanta, Arya said carefully, settling into the chair beside the easel. My parents died when I was 17 in a car accident. After that, it was just me. Minji's brush stopped moving, her dark eyes lifting to search Arya's face with concern that was heartbreaking in someone so young. Were you scared? Minji asked quietly. All alone. Arya considered lying, giving some comforting platitude, but Minji deserved honesty. She understood loss in ways most children never had to. Yes, I was scared, Arya admitted. I missed them terribly, and I didn't know how to take care of myself. But I learned, day by day, that being scared doesn't mean you can't be brave too. Minji nodded solemnly, processing this information with the seriousness of someone who'd learned to evaluate safety and danger carefully. That's why you understand, Minji said matter-of-factly, returning to her painting. That's why Daddy trusts you. Because you know about being scared and brave at the same time. The observation was so perceptive it took Arya's breath away. This 6-year-old had grasped emotional truths that many adults missed entirely. As evening approached, they followed their established routine. Dinner had become a family affair, with Minji chattering about her day while Choi Jihan listened with attention that suggested these conversations were the highlight of his existence. Tonight, though, he seemed distracted, his responses slightly delayed as if part of his mind was occupied elsewhere. After dinner, Arya guided Minji through her bedtime routine, while Choi Jihan disappeared into his office to take what sounded like urgent phone calls. The conversations were conducted in rapid Korean, but Arya caught enough words to understand they involved security concerns and coordination with other locations. Minji had just settled into bed for story time when footsteps approached in the hallway. Not the measured pace of household staff or the confident stride of security personnel, but something different. Quieter. More deliberate. Arya's nursing instincts kicked in, the hypervigilance she'd developed working emergency shifts when things could turn dangerous without warning. Stay here, she whispered to Minji, moving to the bedroom door. But before she could investigate, the lights went out. Not gradually, as if there'd been a power failure, but all at once, a coordinated shutdown that plunged the entire wing into darkness. Minji's sharp intake of breath told Arya the child was seconds away from panic. Moving by memory and touch, she found her way back to the bed and gathered Minji into her arms. It's okay, sweetheart, she murmured, even as her own heart hammered against her ribs. Sometimes the power goes out. Let's make this an adventure. But this wasn't a power outage. Through the windows, she could see that the garden lights were still functioning, and the main house remained illuminated. Someone had deliberately cut power to their wing of the compound. The realization sent cold fear through her veins as she understood they were being isolated, made vulnerable. Minji, I need you to listen very carefully, Arya whispered, carrying the child toward the walk-in closet that offered the most protection. We're going to play a hiding game, just like in the stories. You're going to be the quietest, bravest princess while I go get Daddy, okay? I'm scared, Minji whimpered, her small arms tightening around Arya's neck. I know, baby. But remember what we talked about. Scared and brave at the same time. Can you be brave for me? The closet was deep enough to conceal them both, lined with soft clothing that would muffle sound. Arya positioned Minji behind a rack of dresses, then grabbed her phone to call Choi Jihan. No signal. Someone was jamming communications, which meant this was a coordinated attack, not random criminal activity. Footsteps in the hallway were getting closer, multiple sets moving with military precision. Arya's mind raced through options. The windows were too high for safe escape with a child. The bedroom door was the only exit. Her best option was to hide Minji and hope the intruders were focused on reconnaissance rather than violence. Stay here no matter what happens, Arya breathed into Minji's ear. If anyone comes who isn't Daddy or me, you stay hidden until morning. Promise me. Minji nodded against her shoulder, trembling but trusting. Arya slipped out of the closet and moved toward the bedroom door, grabbing a heavy crystal vase from the dresser as an improvised weapon. Her nursing training hadn't covered combat, but desperation and maternal instinct were powerful motivators. If someone threatened Minji, they'd have to go through her first. The door handle turned slowly, professionally, someone testing whether it was locked. Arya positioned herself beside the door frame, raising the vase, prepared to strike whoever entered. Her breath came in controlled, silent patterns, the way she'd learned to stay calm during medical emergencies. The door opened to reveal a figure in dark clothing and a ski mask, moving with predatory caution. Arya brought the vase down with all her strength, connecting with the intruder's shoulder and sending him stumbling into the room. The crystal shattered, sending fragments across the marble floor, but it bought her precious seconds. She lunged past him toward the hallway, shouting for help at the top of her lungs. The compound's security system should have detected the intrusion by now, but silence suggested either the guards had been neutralized or this was an inside job. Either possibility terrified her. Strong hands grabbed her from behind, lifting her off her feet, but Arya fought with desperate fury. She'd protected patients from violent family members, drug-seeking addicts, and psychiatric emergencies. This was just another threat to be neutralized. Her elbow connected with something soft, earning a grunt of pain, and she broke free long enough to run toward the main house. Emergency lighting flickered on as she reached the central hallway, and suddenly the compound came alive with activity. Security personnel poured in from multiple directions, weapons drawn, radios crackling with coordination. Choi Jihan appeared at the head of the group, his face a mask of cold fury that made him look genuinely terrifying. "Where is she?" he demanded, grabbing Arya's shoulders. "Where's Minji?" "In her closet, safe," Arya gasped, still shaking from adrenaline. "There was someone in her room. I hit him with a vase and ran." Choi Jihan's expression shifted from fear to something that might have been pride. "You protected her," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You put yourself in danger to keep my daughter safe." His hands moved to cup her face, thumbs brushing over her cheekbones as if checking for injuries. For a moment, the chaos around them faded into background noise. Arya was intensely aware of his touch, the warmth of his palms against her skin, the way his dark eyes searched hers with concern that went beyond professional interest. This close, she could see the faint lines around his eyes, the slight stubble that suggested he'd been awake for hours dealing with whatever threat had materialized. "Sir," one of the security team interrupted, "the perpetrators fled when the lights came back on. We're sweeping the entire compound, but preliminary evidence suggests this was reconnaissance rather than kidnapping. They wanted to test our defenses." Choi Jihan's hands dropped from Arya's face, but he remained close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Take her to Minji," he ordered. "Full security detail on that wing until further notice. I want to know how they got past perimeter defenses and why the alarms didn't trigger immediately." As they moved through the compound, Arya became aware of how the crisis had changed something fundamental between them. Choi Jihan's protective instincts toward her had become personal, not just professional. The way he'd touched her face, the relief in his voice when he'd confirmed she was unharmed, suggested feelings that went beyond employer and employee. They found Minji exactly where Arya had left her, curled in the back of the closet, clutching her stuffed rabbit. When she saw her father, she launched herself into his arms with a sob of relief. "Daddy," she cried, burying her face in his neck. "The bad men came, but Arya kept me safe. She was brave like a superhero." Choi Jihan held his daughter tightly, his eyes meeting Arya's over the child's head. The gratitude in his expression was so intense it made her chest tighten with emotion she wasn't ready to examine. "You were very brave too, princess," he murmured against Minji's hair. "And Arya was incredibly brave protecting you." Later, after Minji had finally fallen asleep in a guest room closer to her father's office, Choi Jihan found Arya in the kitchen making tea with hands that still trembled slightly from residual adrenaline. She'd changed into comfortable clothes, washed the crystal dust from her hair, and tried to process what had happened. "You could have been killed tonight," he said without preamble, pouring himself coffee from the expensive machine that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "That intruder could have been armed, could have had backup. You should have stayed hidden with Minji." Arya looked up from her tea, meeting his dark eyes steadily. "He was testing my defenses, not trying to hurt us. If I'd stayed hidden, he might have searched the room more thoroughly and found her anyway. My job is to protect Minji, and that's what I did. Your job is to care for my daughter, not to fight armed intruders," Choi Jihan replied, but there was admiration in his voice despite the criticism. What you did tonight went far beyond any employment contract. You risked your life for someone who isn't even your own child. The observation hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither was quite ready to address. Arya had acted on pure maternal instinct, protecting Minji with the fierce devotion of family rather than the professional care of a hired employee. Somewhere over the past 3 months, the lines had blurred irreversibly. She feels like my own child, Arya admitted quietly, the words slipping out before she could censor them. I love her like she's mine. The confession surprised them both with its honesty and intensity. Choi Jihan moved closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. I know, he said softly. She loves you the same way. You've given her something I couldn't provide alone. You've given her healing. They stood in the kitchen's warm light, the rest of the compound settling into the heightened security of a fortress under threat, and Arya realized her feelings for this dangerous, complicated man had grown beyond anything safe or professional. He wasn't just her employer anymore. He was Minji's father, the man who'd created a home where they could both heal from their respective traumas. The way he was looking at her suggested he was reaching similar conclusions about boundaries they'd crossed without meaning to. Tomorrow there would be increased security protocols, investigations into how their defenses had been breached, and planning for whatever threat was building against his operations. But tonight, they were just two people who'd been terrified of losing something precious, standing closer than they should in a kitchen that smelled like jasmine tea and possibility. Outside, security teams continued their patrols, and somewhere in the darkness, people who meant them harm were planning their next move. The safe haven Arya had found was more fragile than she'd realized, protected only by Choi Jihan's power and reputation. But inside these walls, a family was forming from broken pieces, and she'd fight to protect it with everything she had. The security breach had changed everything and nothing. Minji's recovery continued with remarkable progress, but now armed guards flanked their daily activities. Art time in the garden required 3-man security details. Trips to the nearby market for fresh ingredients became elaborate operations with advanced teams and escape routes. The fortress had tightened around them, protective but suffocating. 2 weeks after the intrusion, Minji had moved past her initial fear and seemed to thrive on the extra attention from security personnel who'd become favorite playmates. She drew pictures of the guards now, carefully rendering their serious expressions and bulky equipment in crayon portraits that made grown men blush with embarrassment. Her laughter echoed through halls that had been silent for too long, a sound that drew Choi Jihan from his office like a magnet. Arya watched him during these moments, noting how his controlled facade cracked when his daughter giggled or called his name with excitement. The dangerous crime boss became simply a father, overwhelmed with gratitude that his child was healing. But in quiet moments, when Minji was occupied and he thought no one was watching, shadows crossed his features that spoke of guilt, regret, and fears he hadn't yet voiced. It was late evening when the emotional walls finally came down. Minji had fallen asleep early, exhausted from a day spent painting murals on the garden shed with Arya's encouragement. The household staff had retired to their quarters, and the compound settled into its heightened nighttime security routine. Arya found Choi Jihan in his study, surrounded by ledgers and reports, but staring out the window at gardens where armed patrols moved like shadows between the trees. You should be sleeping, he said without turning around, somehow sensing her presence despite her quiet approach. The day starts early tomorrow. But his voice lacked its usual command, sounding tired and oddly vulnerable in the lamplight. So should you, Arya replied, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. When was the last time you got a full night's sleep? Since the break-in, he'd been working 16-hour days, coordinating security improvements and investigating how their defenses had been compromised. Choi Jihan turned from the window, and in the soft lighting, she could see exhaustion etched in the lines around his eyes. Sleep is a luxury when people want to hurt your family, he said simply. But there was something else in his expression, a weight that went beyond current security concerns. Tell me about her mother, Arya said gently. The request surprised them both, but she'd been wondering about the woman who'd given Minji her delicate features and gentle spirit. The woman whose death had created the trauma they were all still processing. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't respond. Then he moved to a safe behind his desk, entering a code that revealed documents, cash, weapons, and a small collection of framed photographs. He selected one carefully, handling it like something precious and fragile. Her name was Sujin, he said, passing the photo to Arya. She was a pediatric surgeon at Seoul National Hospital. We met when one of my men was injured and needed discreet medical care. She treated him without questions, without judgment, just focused on saving a life. The photograph showed a beautiful Korean woman in surgical scrubs, her hair pulled back, her eyes intelligent and kind. She was holding a baby Minji, both of them laughing at something outside the camera's range. The love between mother and daughter was evident in every detail of the image. She was everything good that I'm not, Choi Jihan continued, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. Clean hands, honest work, healing people instead of hurting them. I couldn't understand why she'd want anything to do with someone like me. Arya studied the photograph, then looked up at him. But she did want to be with you. She chose to build a family with you. That says something about who you really are underneath the business. He took the photo back, his fingers tracing the frame's edges. The Park family wanted to expand their territory into areas I controlled. Traditional negotiation failed, so they decided to use pressure tactics. They took Sujin from the hospital parking garage, sent me videos of her begging for mercy, demanding I turn over my operations in exchange for her life. The words came out flat, emotionless, but Arya could see the pain he was struggling to contain. She'd worked enough trauma cases to recognize someone reliving their worst nightmare. Her heart ached for the man who'd lost everything and the child who'd witnessed unspeakable violence. I assembled every resource, called in every favor, tracked them to a warehouse in Incheon. Choi Jihan continued. But when we finally found her, we were too late. They'd killed her anyway, knowing that a dead wife would send a stronger message than a rescued one. Minji was there because they'd taken her from the hospital daycare. She saw everything. Arya felt tears burning her eyes as she understood the full scope of the trauma both father and daughter carried. This wasn't just about criminal rivalry or business disputes. This was about a family destroyed by violence, survivors struggling with guilt and grief that would never fully heal. You blame yourself, she said quietly. Choi Jihan's laugh was bitter, self-recriminating. I brought danger into her life by loving her. My business, my enemies, my choices killed the only innocent thing I'd ever been part of. And my daughter paid the price by losing her mother and nearly losing herself to trauma. Moving without conscious thought, Arya stood and crossed to his chair, kneeling beside him so they were at eye level. You didn't kill your wife. Monsters killed your wife. You've spent every day since then protecting your daughter and helping her heal. That's not failure. That's love. Choi Jihan's carefully maintained control cracked completely. He buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking with grief he'd suppressed for months while focusing on Minji's needs. Arya reached out tentatively, then wrapped her arms around him, offering comfort the way she would to any parent processing unbearable loss. He held onto her like she was an anchor in a storm, his face pressed against her shoulder, and she felt the exact moment when professional boundaries dissolved completely. This wasn't her employer breaking down. This was the man she'd fallen in love with, sharing his deepest wounds and trusting her with vulnerability he'd never shown anyone else. I gave up believing I could have a family after I lost my license, Arya whispered against his hair. I thought my chance to care for children, to be part of something meaningful, was over forever. But Minji brought that dream back to life. You both did. When he lifted his head to look at her, his dark eyes were raw with emotion, but also something else. Awareness. Recognition. The acknowledgement that what had grown between them went far beyond professional care or convenient arrangement. She was inches away from his face, close enough to see gold flecks in his irises, close enough to feel his breath against her lips. Arya, he said, and her name sounded different in his voice. Not the polite distance of an employer, but the roughened tone of a man fighting desire he could no longer pretend didn't exist. The space between them charged with possibility and danger and inevitability. He leaned forward slightly. She tilted her face up, and for one perfect moment they balanced on the edge of crossing a line that would change everything. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing across her skin with reverent gentleness that made her breath catch. The security alarm shattered the moment like glass. Piercing electronic wails filled the compound as every light blazed to life, emergency protocols activating with military precision. Choi Ji-han was on his feet instantly, all traces of vulnerability replaced by cold operational focus. "Stay with Minji," he ordered, moving toward the gun's safe with practiced efficiency. "Full lockdown until we identify the threat." His phone was already buzzing with reports from security teams positioned throughout the grounds. Arya ran toward Minji's room, her heart hammering with fear that had nothing to do with interrupted romance and everything to do with protecting a sleeping child. But when she reached the bedroom, she found Minji sitting up in bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit, but remarkably calm. "It's okay," Minji said with 6-year-old wisdom. "The alarms mean Daddy's men are keeping us safe. But you look scared. Are you okay, Arya?" The role reversal was heartbreaking and wonderful, the traumatized child offering comfort to the adult who'd been caring for her. "I'm fine, sweetheart," Arya said, gathering Minji into her arms and moving toward the reinforced interior room that served as their designated safe space. Just surprised by the loud noise. The alarm stopped after 10 minutes, replaced by the controlled chaos of an all-clear protocol. But Choi Ji-han's expression when he found them suggested the threat had been more serious than a false alarm. "Sir," one of his lieutenants appeared in the doorway, holding a manila envelope with obvious reluctance. "These were found at the main gate. Someone wanted us to know they'd been watching." Choi Ji-han's face went deadly still as he examined the contents. Then he held up a series of photographs that made Arya's blood turn to ice. Pictures of her and Minji at the local market 3 days earlier, taken with telephoto lenses from multiple angles. Images of Minji playing in the garden, of Arya reading stories in the sunroom, of both of them during their daily walk through the secured grounds. "They know everything about your routines," the lieutenant continued grimly. Facial recognition software identified all household members and their relationships. This wasn't random reconnaissance. This was preparation for something specific. "The Park family," Choi Ji-han said, and his voice carried the promise of violence. "They're not just testing our defenses anymore. They're targeting my family directly." His eyes found Arya's face, and she saw terrible understanding pass between them. "This is because of me," Arya whispered, horrified realization crashing over her. "They're not just threatening Minji. They're threatening me because they know what I mean to both of you." Her presence had made the child she loved a target, and the man she was falling for a vulnerable enemy. The photographs were professional quality, taken over several days from concealed positions that suggested extensive planning and resources. Someone had been watching them for weeks, documenting their lives, preparing for whatever operation they had planned. The violation felt personal and terrifying. "No one touches what's mine," Choi Ji-han said, but his fury was cold and controlled rather than hot and reckless. Triple security on all movements outside the compound. No exceptions. And send a message to Park Dong-wook that his surveillance activities have been noted and will be answered appropriately. As additional security personnel flooded the compound and emergency protocols locked down every entrance, Arya understood that their peaceful months of healing and growing closer were over. The dangerous world had found them, and this time, the threat was specifically designed to exploit the love that had grown between them. Sitting in the reinforced safe room with Minji asleep in her lap and armed guards outside the door, Arya realized she'd crossed more than professional boundaries tonight. She'd fallen completely, irrevocably in love with both the man and the child, and that love had made them all targets. The question now was whether Choi Ji-han's power was enough to protect what they'd built together, or whether loving them would ultimately destroy the family she'd never expected to find. The attack came at dawn, precisely when the compound's defenses were rotating shifts and visibility was compromised by morning fog. Arya woke to the sound of automatic gunfire and explosions that shook the reinforced windows of the safe wing, where she and Minji had been relocated for maximum protection. Emergency lighting bathed everything in red, and the compound's lockdown protocols activated with mechanical precision. Minji sat up in the reinforced bedroom, her dark eyes wide, but surprisingly calm. "More bad men," she said matter-of-factly, reaching for Arya's hand. "But Daddy will stop them, right?" The child's faith in her father's power was absolute. even as the sounds of warfare echoed through the halls. "Yes, sweetheart," Arya said, gathering Minji into her arms and moving toward the interior safe room that had been designed to withstand direct assault. Daddy's very good at protecting his family. But inside, her heart raced with terror as she recognized this wasn't random violence. This was a coordinated attack designed to overwhelm their defenses and reach them specifically. The safe room was a technological marvel, equipped with independent air filtration, emergency supplies, and communication systems that couldn't be compromised from outside. Thick steel doors sealed them into a space that felt more like a luxury hotel room than a bunker, complete with comfortable furniture and entertainment systems to keep a child calm during extended lockdowns. For the first hour, the plan worked perfectly. Minji colored quietly while Arya monitored security feeds that showed Choi Jihan's men repelling attackers from multiple entry points. The Park family had brought significant firepower, but the compound's defenses were holding. Through encrypted communications, she could hear Choi Jihan coordinating responses from his command center, his voice cold and professional despite the chaos around him. Then the explosions got closer, and the lights flickered. Emergency power kicked in, but something had penetrated their outer defenses. On the security monitors, Arya watched armed figures in tactical gear breaching the main house, moving with military precision toward the residential wings. That's when Minji started to break down. The sounds of violence, the flashing lights, the metallic smell of gunpowder seeping through the ventilation system triggered memories her young mind had tried to suppress. She began to hyperventilate, her small body shaking uncontrollably as the trauma of witnessing her mother's death crashed over her again. "I can't breathe," Minji gasped, clutching at her throat. "Mommy, where's Mommy?" The regression was complete and terrifying, the progress of months dissolving as her mind retreated to that awful night 8 months earlier. Her lips were turning blue, and her pulse was racing toward dangerous levels. Arya recognized the signs immediately. Panic-induced respiratory distress complicated by traumatic flashback episodes. She needed medical supplies that were locked in a cabinet outside the safe room, in an area that was no longer secure. But watching Minji struggle for breath, seeing the terror in those young eyes, made the choice inevitable. "I have to get your medicine, baby," Arya said, forcing her voice to remain calm despite her own fear. "I need you to try to breathe slowly while I'm gone. Count to 10, then count again. Can you do that for me?" Minji nodded weakly, but her breathing remained shallow and rapid. The steel door opened with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a corridor filled with smoke and the distant sound of gunfire. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red, and broken glass crunched under her feet as she ran toward the medical supply station. Her nursing training took over, suppressing fear in favor of clinical focus on a patient who needed immediate intervention. The medication cabinet was intact, but getting to it required crossing an exposed hallway where windows had been shattered by explosions. Arya could hear voices speaking Korean, probably security personnel, but she couldn't identify friend from foe in the chaos. She grabbed the emergency inhaler and anxiety medication that would stabilize Minji's breathing, then turned to race back to safety. A figure in tactical gear appeared at the end of the hallway, weapon raised, and for a terrifying moment Arya thought she was about to die. Then she recognized the earpiece and tactical vest that marked him as one of Choi Jihan's men rather than an intruder. "Miss Thompson," he said, moving to escort her back to the safe room. "Sir's orders are that you remain locked down until further notice." "She's having a medical emergency," Arya explained quickly. "Respiratory distress from trauma response. I had to get her medication." Back in the safe room, Arya administered the inhaler with practiced efficiency, then coached Minji through breathing exercises that gradually brought her oxygen saturation back to normal levels. The child's color improved, her pulse stabilized, and the desperate clutching at her throat eased into more manageable anxiety. "You came back," Minji whispered, her voice hoarse from the breathing episode. "Even when it was dangerous, you came back for me." The observation was delivered with 6-year-old directness, but it carried enormous emotional weight. In Minji's traumatized worldview, adults didn't reliably return when danger appeared. They disappeared, like her mother had disappeared, leaving children alone with monsters. "I will always come back for you," Arya said firmly, pulling Minji onto her lap and holding her close. Nothing will ever stop me from taking care of you. I promise. As she spoke the words, she realized they were more than comfort for a frightened child. They were a vow, a commitment that went beyond employment or convenience. Are you going to be my new mommy? Minji asked quietly, her small fingers tracing patterns on Arya's shirt. Like Daddy said when he thought I was sleeping. The question caught Arya completely off guard, but the hope in Minji's voice made her throat tighten with emotion. Would you like that? Arya asked gently. Minji nodded emphatically, then pulled back to look seriously into Arya's eyes. I love you like I loved first mommy, she said with devastating honesty. But different. Like you belong with us forever. Before Arya could respond, the safe room door opened again, and Choi Jihan appeared in the entrance. His expensive suit was torn and dirty, his face streaked with smoke and what looked suspiciously like blood. But his dark eyes blazed with relief as he took in the sight of them safe and unharmed. The compound is secure, he announced, though exhaustion was evident in every line of his body. Park family leadership has been eliminated. Their remaining associates have been offered the choice of exile or joining their bosses. Most chose exile. He moved into the room, and Arya could see his hands were shaking slightly from adrenaline and fatigue. Daddy, Minji called out, launching herself from Arya's lap into her father's arms. Arya saved me again. I got scared and couldn't breathe, but she got my medicine even though there were bad men with guns. She's really brave, isn't she? Choi Jihan held his daughter tightly, but his eyes remained fixed on Arya's face. You left the safe room, he said, and his voice carried both fury and admiration. You risked your life for her medical supplies when staying locked down would have been safer. She needed help, Arya replied simply. That's what family does for each other. The word slipped out before she could censor it, hanging in the air between them with all its implications and promises. Family, Choi Jihan repeated slowly, setting Minji down but keeping one hand on her shoulder. His gaze never left Arya's face as he processed what she'd said, what she'd done, what it meant for all of them. You could have been killed. If those had been Park family soldiers instead of my men, if the corridor had been compromised, if the medical station had been booby-trapped. But I wasn't killed, Arya interrupted, standing so they were eye to eye. I made a choice to protect someone I love, and it worked. Just like you made choices tonight to eliminate threats to your family. We both did what was necessary. The word love seemed to echo in the reinforced space, and Choi Jihan's expression shifted from anger to something much more complex. You love her, he said quietly. You love my daughter enough to risk everything for her. It wasn't a question, but a recognition of truth he'd probably known for weeks. I love both of you, Arya admitted, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the confession. I love Minji like she's my own child, and I love you like you're the man I want to spend my life protecting and being protected by. The vulnerability was terrifying but liberating, like stepping off a cliff and discovering she could fly. Choi Jihan moved closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, could smell the scent of gunpowder and expensive cologne that clung to his ruined shirt. You're mine now, he said, his voice rough with emotion and possessiveness. Both of you. I don't share what belongs to me, and I protect what's mine with everything I have. Yes, Arya breathed, the single word carrying acceptance of everything the declaration implied. She was choosing his dangerous world, his protective obsession, his capacity for violence in service of love. She was choosing family over safety, commitment over convenience, forever over anything temporary. He kissed her then, hard and desperate and claiming, pouring months of suppressed desire and recent terror into the contact between their lips. She kissed him back with equal intensity, her hands fisting in his torn shirt, tasting smoke and determination and the promise of belonging somewhere she'd never expected to find. Can I have two daddies and a mommy now? Minji asked from somewhere near their feet, her child's logic cutting through the adult complexity with devastating simplicity. Choi Jihan broke the kiss to look down at his daughter, then back at Arya with something that might have been wonder. You want to marry Arya, don't you, Daddy? Minji continued with 6-year-old directness. So we can all be a real family like in the storybooks. And then nobody can ever take us away from each other. The marriage proposal from a child's lips was both heartbreaking and perfect, stripping away pretense to focus on what really mattered. They'd already committed to each other through crisis and choice. Legal ceremonies would just make official what their hearts had already decided. Yes, Princess, Choi Jihan said softly, his arm tightening around Arya's waist. I want to marry Arya, so we can all be a real family. Would you like that? Minji's squeal of delight was answer enough, but she threw herself at both adults, creating a three-way hug that felt like the missing piece of a puzzle clicking into place. Outside, the compound was already being repaired and reinforced, dead enemies removed, security protocols updated to prevent future breaches. But inside the safe room where they'd found each other completely, a family was born from love and choice and the shared determination to protect what they'd built together. The Park family threat was eliminated permanently, but Choi Jihan's world would always carry dangers. Arya accepted that reality along with everything else, because some risks were worth taking for the right people. She'd found her purpose in caring for Minji, her partner in loving Jihan, and her home in a fortress built on devotion as much as power. They'd all been broken before they found each other. Now they were whole. 6 weeks later, the compound had been transformed from a battlefield into something that looked more like a palace preparing for celebration. The damaged windows had been replaced with bulletproof glass that sparkled like diamonds in the morning sun. New security systems hummed invisibly through reinforced walls, and the gardens had been restored to their previous perfection, with additional landscaping that concealed defensive positions without compromising beauty. Minji had not only recovered from the trauma of the attack, she'd emerged stronger and more confident than anyone had dared hope. The child who'd been mute for 8 months now chattered constantly, asking questions about everything from wedding flowers to whether her new mommy would teach her to braid hair. Her laughter filled rooms that had been silent too long, and her artwork had evolved from tentative sketches to bold paintings that covered every available wall space. This morning, she was directing wedding preparations with the imperious authority of someone who decided she was personally responsible for ensuring everything was perfect. Arya watched from the window of her room, now permanently relocated to the master wing, as Minji instructed security personnel on the proper placement of white ribbons around the garden pavilion where the ceremony would take place. The past month and a half had been a whirlwind of legal arrangements, security upgrades, and the delicate process of blending their lives into something permanent. Choi Jihan had handled the practical aspects with his usual efficiency, arranging for Arya's nursing license to be fully restored, establishing legal guardianship documents that would make her Minji's official mother, and quietly reorganizing his business operations to create more legitimate revenue streams that wouldn't require the level of violence that had nearly cost them everything. But the emotional integration had been even more remarkable. Watching Jihan teach Minji how to tie her shoes while discussing quarterly profit reports had become routine. Seeing Arya help him select appropriate gifts for business associates while simultaneously planning educational activities for their daughter felt natural. They'd become a family unit that functioned seamlessly, each member essential to the other's happiness and security. The wedding ceremony itself was small and private, limited to household staff and Choi Jihan's most trusted associates. Dr. Kim served as officiant, having been ordained online specifically for the occasion after Minji announced that the man who'd helped keep her healthy should be the one to make her family official. The guest list included exactly 12 people, but the love and joy radiating from the garden pavilion could have filled a cathedral. Arya wore a simple white dress that Minji had helped select from dozens of options, chosen because it had sleeves that could be rolled up for hugging and a skirt that twirled when she spun around. Her hair was styled in loose waves that framed her face, and her only jewelry was a necklace Choi Jihan had commissioned specifically for this day, featuring a pendant with 3 interlocking circles representing their unbreakable family bond. Choi Jihan looked devastating in a perfectly tailored black suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean frame. But what made Arya's breath catch was the expression on his face as she walked down the aisle between the garden beds they'd planted together. He looked like a man who'd been given everything he'd never dared hope for, vulnerable and grateful and completely devoted. Minji served as flower girl, taking her responsibilities seriously as she scattered white rose petals with mathematical precision. She'd insisted on wearing a dress that matched Arya's, complete with tiny white shoes that clicked authoritatively on the stone pathway. When the officiant asked who gave this woman to be married, Minji stepped forward importantly. "I do," she announced in her clear 6-year-old voice. "Ari is going to be my new mommy, and Daddy's going to be her husband, and we're all going to live together forever and ever." The adult guest smiled at the child's earnestness, but Arya felt tears burning her eyes at the profound truth of the simple declaration. The vows they'd written were brief but intense, focusing on protection, devotion, and the shared commitment to building something beautiful from the broken pieces of their individual pasts. Choi Jihan promised to shield their family from any threat while ensuring Arya never felt like a prisoner in their secure world. Arya vowed to love both father and daughter with every breath she took, to help heal their wounds while building new memories that would overshadow old sorrows. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Minji cheered loudly enough to startle the security personnel positioned discreetly around the garden perimeter. The kiss that sealed their marriage was gentle and reverent, filled with promise rather than passion, appropriate for a ceremony witnessed by their daughter and household staff who'd become extended family. The reception was held in the main dining room, transformed with white flowers and candles that cast everything in warm golden light. Mrs. Park, the head housekeeper who'd been part of the household since Minji's birth, had outdone herself preparing traditional Korean dishes alongside American comfort foods that represented Arya's heritage. The wedding cake was modest but perfect, decorated with sugar flowers that Minji had helped design. During the toasts, unexpected emotions surfaced as staff members who'd witnessed their journey from employer-employee relationship to genuine love shared stories about watching their family form. Even the taciturn security chief became misty-eyed when describing how Minji's laughter had changed the entire atmosphere of the compound, making their job feel like protecting joy rather than just guarding assets. But the most meaningful moment came when Minji climbed onto a chair to deliver her own toast, having apparently prepared remarks without telling any of the adults. She held her juice glass high and spoke with the seriousness of someone making an important announcement. "Before Arya came, Daddy was sad and I was scared," she said in her clear voice. "Now Daddy smiles when he thinks nobody's watching. And I'm not scared anymore, because I have a mommy who keeps me safe and a daddy who keeps us both safe. And we have a family, which is the best thing in the whole world." The simplicity and honesty of the child's words left every adult in the room struggling with emotion. Choi Jihan's hand found Arya's under the table, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that had become automatic over the past months. They'd created something precious together, something worth protecting with every resource at their disposal. Later that evening, after Minji had been tucked into bed with promises that nothing would change except now she could officially call Arya mommy, the newlyweds found themselves alone on the private terrace outside their shared bedroom. The compound settled into its nighttime security routine around them, but inside the reinforced walls, peace reigned. "A year ago, I was scrubbing office floors and wondering if I'd ever have a family," Arya said quietly, leaning against the railing as she looked out over gardens where their daughter's artwork was displayed on easels throughout the flower beds. "I'd given up on the idea of having children, having a partner who truly valued what I could offer." Choi Jihan moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. "A year ago, I was convinced I destroyed any chance of happiness by bringing violence into my wife's life," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "I thought Minji would never recover, that I'd failed as a father and as a man." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching security personnel make their rounds, noting the subtle changes that had transformed their fortress into a home. The new playground equipment barely visible in the moonlight. The art studio that had been converted from a storage room. The small details that marked a space designed for raising a family rather than just conducting business. 6 months later, the transformation was even more complete. Choi Jihan had successfully transitioned 60% of his operations to legitimate businesses, maintaining just enough of the darker enterprises to fund their lifestyle and security needs while reducing the daily dangers that had once defined their existence. His reputation still commanded respect and fear when necessary, but increasingly, former enemies were becoming business partners who preferred profit to violence. Arya had returned to nursing part-time, providing medical consulting for several private clinics that serve the international business community in Seoul. Her expertise in trauma recovery had become particularly valuable, and she'd begun developing programs that helped other children process violent experiences. The work was fulfilling in ways that went beyond financial compensation, giving her professional identity back while allowing her to maintain primary focus on their family. Minji was thriving beyond anyone's wildest expectations. She'd tested into advanced programs for gifted children. Her artistic abilities had attracted attention from professional instructors, and her social skills had recovered to the point where she'd been invited to 3 birthday parties in the past month. The traumatized, silent child had become a confident, creative, socially engaged little girl who spoke 3 languages and could explain complex mathematical concepts to adults who struggled to follow her logic. But more importantly, she was happy. Genuinely, effusively, contagiously happy in the way that only children who feel completely secure and unconditionally loved can be. She'd started asking about siblings, wondering if babies came from stores or hospitals, and whether she could help pick out names if they decided to add to their family. The pregnancy announcement came during a quiet family dinner on a Tuesday evening in spring. Arya had been feeling tired and emotional for several weeks, symptoms she'd initially attributed to the stress of balancing her new consulting work with family responsibilities. But when the home pregnancy test showed positive results, the implications hit her with stunning force. Minji's reaction to the news was pure 80-year-old excitement. She immediately began planning nursery decorations, selecting names for both boys and girls, and announcing to anyone who would listen that she was going to be the best big sister in the world. Her enthusiasm was infectious, turning what might have been a complicated conversation into a celebration of expanding possibilities. Choi Jihan's response was more complex, but equally positive. The idea of another child brought back memories of Sujin's pregnancy, but instead of triggering grief, the recollections highlighted how different this pregnancy would be. Arya was part of his world by choice, protected by systems that had been tested and proven effective. Their child would grow up in security his first daughter had never known. The nursery preparation became a family project that consumed weekends and evenings. Minji insisted on painting murals that told stories, while Choi Jihan installed security systems that would monitor everything from room temperature to air quality. Arya selected furniture that would grow with the child, practical choices informed by her medical background and experience with pediatric development. By her second trimester, the pregnancy had settled into comfortable routine. Morning sickness faded, energy returned, and the daily rhythm of their lives adjusted to accommodate doctor appointments and preparation for their expanding family. Choi Jihan had become almost comically protective, insisting on security details for grocery shopping and having his personal physician on speed dial for any concerns, however minor. The baby, a son they named David Jihan, arrived on a snowy December morning after 12 hours of labor that tested everyone's nerves. Choi Jihan paced the private medical suite they'd had installed in the compound, while Minji drew pictures for her baby brother and asked every 5 minutes if he'd arrived yet. When David finally made his appearance, healthy and vocal and perfect, the emotion in the room was overwhelming. Watching Choi Jihan hold his son for the first time, seeing the wonder and protectiveness and pure love on his face, Arya understood that their family was complete in ways that went beyond number of members. They'd created something beautiful and strong and lasting, built on foundations that could weather any external threats. Minji fell in love with her baby brother immediately, assuming responsibilities that ranged from bottle preparation to diaper changing assistance to reading him stories he was too young to understand. She declared herself his official protector and announced that anyone who wanted to hurt David would have to go through her first, a declaration that made the security staff smile with recognition of family traits. 2 years later, their life had settled into patterns that felt both secure and dynamic. David was walking and chattering in 3 languages, his personality showing signs of both his father's intensity and his mother's compassion. Minji was excelling in advanced academic programs while maintaining friendships with children from families that had no idea about the complexities of her father's business background. Choi Jihan had completed the transition to primarily legitimate operations, though he maintained enough connections to ensure their continued security and respect within international business circles. The compound had been renovated again, this time to accommodate family gatherings and social events that would have been impossible during their early days together. Aria's consulting practice had expanded into a full clinic specializing in trauma recovery for families affected by violence. Her patient base included children of diplomats, business executives, and others whose lives intersected with dangerous realities. The work was demanding but deeply satisfying, allowing her to use her experiences to help other families heal and thrive. But the most remarkable transformation was in their daily happiness. Breakfast conversations that included discussions of finger painting techniques and quarterly profit margins. Bedtime stories read in Korean, English, and David's invented language that somehow made perfect sense to him. Family movie nights where action films were carefully selected to exclude content that might trigger Minji's memories, though she'd grown strong enough that most ordinary violence and entertainment didn't affect her anymore. On the 5th anniversary of the day Arya first walked through their gates, desperate and nearly defeated, they gathered in the garden where their children played, while security personnel maintained discreet watch. The woman who'd arrived with nothing but determination and professional skills had become the center of a family that commanded respect throughout Seoul's complex social hierarchy. Choi Jihan found her in the spot where they'd held their wedding ceremony, now surrounded by flower beds that David liked to explore under his sister's careful supervision. She was watching their children play, her expression soft with contentment that had replaced the exhaustion and worry he remembered from their first meeting. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly, settling beside her on the bench they'd installed when David started walking and needed places for tired parents to rest during outdoor adventures. "About choosing this life, this family, this complicated man who brought danger into your world." Arya considered the question seriously, looking around at the garden where their children played safely, the house where they'd built memories that would last lifetimes, the life they'd created from nothing but mutual need and growing love. "Not one," she said finally, leaning into his warmth as she watched Minji teach David how to arrange flowers in patterns that pleased his developing aesthetic sensibilities. "I came here looking for survival. I found everything I'd ever dreamed of and things I'd never imagined possible." Choi Jihan's arm tightened around her shoulders as they watched their children discover new games in the fading afternoon light. The woman who'd walked into his life as a desperate stranger had become his anchor, his partner, the mother of his children, and the reason he got up every morning with enthusiasm rather than mere duty. They'd all been broken when they found each other. Now they were a family that could weather any storm, protect any threat, and build any future they chose to imagine. The fortress had become a home, the employer had become a husband, and the nanny had become the heart of everything that mattered. 5 years later, Arya still sometimes woke up amazed that this was her life. But the amazement had been joined by deep satisfaction and unshakable confidence that they'd built something permanent and beautiful and worth everything they'd invested to protect it. She'd saved Minji, married Jihan, and created a family that would thrive for generations. The scared, desperate woman who'd answered a job posting for impossible money was gone. In her place was Arya Choi, beloved wife, devoted mother, successful professional, and the undisputed queen of one of Seoul's most powerful families. She'd kept every promise she'd ever made, and life had rewarded her with everything she'd ever wanted plus dreams she'd never dared dream.